Welcome to The Mystic and the Skeptic, the show that asks the tough questions and explores different alternatives to today's pressing issues, theories, or enigmas.
A podcast devoted to the exploration of all things mystical, philosophical, scientific, political, conspiratorial, and cosmic.
In this week's show, we feature a review of the film The Possession. This story about a father finding a Jewish exorcist to heal his demon-possessed daughter sounds familiar, but it's a different take on the well-known horror genre. Our guest is the writer of the book, The Dybbuk Box, Jason Haxton, who offers insider information as he is involved with the production of the sequel and was an advisor for the original film, which came out in 2012. Mr. Haxton has been featured on many shows dealing with the supernatural for the SyFy channel, the Travel channel, and the History channel. The wine box, which the movie is based on and Mr. Haxton owns, is surrounded by mysterious events. The contents of the box are the following: 4 stones from pillars where shalom is written. It contains 2 1920s pennies, a lock of blonde hair bound with a cord, a lock of black/brown hair bound with a cord, 1 dried rose bud, a single candle holder with 4 octopus-shaped legs, and a small golden wine goblet. According to the Encyclopedia of Judaism, a Dybbuk in Jewish folklore is an evil spirit who has the ability to enter into a living person, cleaving to their soul and causing mental illness. Although not originally part of Talmudic literature nor the Kabbalah, there are other beings mentioned such as the Ruach Tezazit, or as is called in the New Testament, an unclean spirit. The concept of possession has its roots in the Bible, where the spirits of God, prophecy, or wisdom at times overcome some individuals, such as in the passage of Exodus 31:3 and in Numbers 27:18. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian, documented a case of demon possession, which was supposedly witnessed by Caesar. According to Josephus, Eleazar expelled a demon in front of Emperor Vespasian, thanks to the powers of King Solomon. According to Josephus, quote, he put a ring that had a root of one of those sorts mentioned by Solomon, and when he drew out the demon through his nostrils, making still mention of Solomon and reciting the incantations which he composed, and when this was done, the skill and wisdom of Solomon was shown very manifestly. End quote. The Talmud discusses several passages regarding demons. As in rabbinic tradition and Middle Eastern popular folklore of the time, demons were responsible and the cause of many diseases. Ancient esoteric treatises such as the Halakot Merkabah include detailed angelological lists naming the angels and their functions, as well as presentations of the secret names of God and archangels. These names were often used by ancient religions as part of their incantation formulas. The Jews, like the Babylonians, believed that all manners of miracles could be wrought by one who knew the secret of God's name. In Psalm 29, there are 7 voices known to be powerful according to a passage in the Talmud. Post-biblical Jewish community viewed exorcism as a form of curing major illnesses such as speechlessness, blindness, epilepsy, and mania. Talmudic rabbis ascribed the various diseases to demons and considered the following diseases originating from supernatural sources: blindness, catalepsy, headache or meningitis, epilepsy, nightmares, delirious fever, and madness, leprosy, and melancholy. Other signs of possession mentioned are falling into fire and water, convulsions, foaming at the mouth, raving, grinding of teeth, savage fierceness, and abnormal strength. Just as the Gospel spelled out much about angels and demons, many scholars feel influences from Zoroastrianism was what made demon possession so prevalent in both the Babylonian Talmud and the New Testament. Although stories about dybbukim, or spirits clinging to human bodies, are common in the time of the Second Temple and the Talmudic periods, particularly in the Gospels, the term Dybbuk means to cleave is only found in later Jewish mystical literature, where it denotes the relation between evil spirits and the human body. At first, the Dybbuk was considered to be a devil or a demon which entered the body of a sick person. Later, an explanation common among other people was added, namely that some of the dybbukim are the spirits of dead persons who were not laid to rest and thus became demons. In the 13th century Kabbalistic work known as the Zohar, the existence of demon follows Talmudic legends, stressing the origin of demons in sexual intercourse between humans and demonic powers. Similarly, Christian medieval demonology developed sexual demons such as the succubi and incubi. According to legend, Cain and Abel, who contained some of the impurity of the serpent, had sexual relations with Eve, possessed a certain demonic element, and various demons came from them. Many Jewish sages such as Joseph Caro, Isaac Luria, Chaim Vital, Isaiah Horowitz, and Hofetz Chaim all believed to possess the ability to exorcise spirits from their followers. There are many manuscripts with detailed instructions on how to exorcise dybbukim in Hasidic literature. The process is called a tikkun, or restoration. These souls of a deceased individual who possesses another person are released to continue its gilgul, or transmigration, to another life. In modern times, experts associate this phenomena with hysteria and sometimes even in manifestations of schizophrenia. Now let's get back to the movie. The movie, The Possession, focuses on a particular spirit that takes over a little girl's body. Mr. Haxton shares about the lead role of Jewish rapper Matisyahu, who plays a young rabbi named Dybbuk in the film.
In the movie, he looks like he might be, 40, 50-year-old gray-haired man, And as soon as the movie was over, he had a complete change. Somewhat in his musical style. He completely changed his physical look. And he looked like a 23, 24-year-old guy. It's like, whoa.
Mr. Haxton has mentioned in the past that he consulted with several Jewish leaders, including Rabbi Lynn Goldstein from Bloomington, Illinois, Rabbi Gershon Winkler from Southern California, and Rabbi Gold from England. It is interesting to me that none of them have tried to get rid of the entity attached to the box. All of them know of the Jewish ritual of expulsion. Even on the box itself, it has Judaism's powerful prayer, which acknowledges God's sovereignty and is known as the Shema. In the movie, the parent of the possessed girl, Clyde, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, recites Psalm 91 to neutralize the forces of evil. According to Rabbi Geoffrey W. Dennis, who wrote the Encyclopedia of Jewish Myth, Magic, and Mysticism, quote, Dybbuks are a form of spirit possession, not as demonic possession. In Jewish tradition, dybbukim do not possess innocent or pure souls, but invade those whose lives have made them vulnerable to such infestations through sin and lax observance of the Jewish faith. End quote. The process of Jewish exorcism involves a minyan, a quorum of 10 men, and any Jewish person who has the knowledge to perform the ritual, such as rabbis, local holy men, or the educated, can expel a demon. The ritual also involves reciting not only Psalm 91, the Psalm of Affliction, but Psalm 16 and 121 as well, which are known to neutralize the spirit. Other objects associated with the process are prayer shawls and ram horns. It may also involve a covering of mirrors around the house, since traditional Jews see them as doorways between the living and the dead. This is depicted in the movie as, again, Rabbi Dybbuk or Matisyahu uses these elements to neutralize the demon at the end of the film. There was another film called The Unborn, starring Gary Oldman, which depicts the Jewish approach to demons and evil spirits. Although I was skeptical about this movie, being afraid that Jewish folklore was being exploited to make a film, it is very impressive since it not only shows a good understanding of Jewish demonology, but it focuses on themes on family relationships, supernatural phenomena, and how religious groups can support people undergoing traumatic experiences. Mr. Haxton now shares an inside scoop on The Possession 2, which is in the process of pre-production. Any way you can give us a little update on the Dybbuk movie? I'm still trying to get through your book. How is the Possession 2 coming along?
Well, I did talk to them. The script is done. The director's hired. They just need the funding. And what directors, they have a lot of money, but if you're a smart director, you don't use your own money. So what you do is you want to use someone else's money because there is always the chance of a failure. So in October, typically, there's an international meeting where people who want to invest in films will come, and then all the directors and producers will tell about what their idea is, and do you want to hop on board? And if you give me $1 million and this is successful, then you will get $1 million extra back. So give me $1 million and you get back $2 million if all goes well. And, like anything else, there's never a guarantee, but certain directors are pretty consistent with payola. So right now, the only thing we're waiting for is the money, and that usually happens in October. But in the meantime, there has been a show called Deadly Possession on the Travel Channel with Zach Bagans, and that's kind of an interesting because we do have a rabbi that is involved with it, and I think that's pretty cool. You mentioned the Hasidic communities in New York, and, it's fascinating how these closed communities can be like 250,000 people. But again, on the Dybbuk, for now, things are quiet, and, if you're curious about Jewish spirituality, I write a lot about what I've learned by hanging, like with the Amish, hanging out with a bunch of Jewish Kabbalah and rabbi people, female rabbis, male rabbis, have been really open to that. And so, look up online the Dybbuk box, DIBBUKBOX.
In the future, if you think of any other topic you'd like to share with us, or your impression of the movie when it comes out, we would love to hear that. I just saw the first Resident Evil movie, and I cannot believe how grotesque and like sexist of a movie that was.
Yeah, I don't watch horror movie in general, or is sexist, and it's like throwing buckets of blood at the camera and, gratuitous sex. It's like, luckily mine is more of a thriller, and the good thing is you don't have that kind of thing. It's actually what is more scary, because they used a European, is sometimes instead of a lot of noise, as he would say, quiet is more scary than noise, because you're left with yourself. So again, all the way around, I think Sam Raimi did a great job on the original Possession, and I look forward to seeing what he does with the sequel. And it will happen. They're not in any hurry, so they wanted to get it right, and I appreciate that.
When I first saw your book, there was other books under it, and I thought they were written by you, but it was just things that are similar. Have you studied or researched any other paranormal stuff and the relation with science?
Again, it's not really an area. Weirdly enough, I've studied this object as it relates to the Jewish mysticism, and almost all mysticism and magic has come through the Jewish population. And so that's why it's been a great study. I have literally 9 linear feet of files, because I took it very seriously.
In this week's show, we're discussing mysticism with Jason Haxton, the owner of the Dybbuk box, a wine box surrounded by mysterious events and an interesting background story. This item, which first appeared on eBay, became popular in the Hollywood blockbuster The Possession. Mr. Haxton is the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine in Kirksville, Missouri, and has been interviewed by the SyFy channel, and his story has been featured on the Travel Channel and many other podcasts dealing with the supernatural. When I first heard about the movie, I was afraid that Jewish folklore was being exploited for cheap thrills. I saw the movie and was impressed with it, since it was a serious take on Jewish version of demonology. So, Mr. Haxton, please tell us about yourself and how you came across this object.
Well, thanks so much, David. Interestingly, I wasn't really looking for this kind of an item, and I appreciate your sensitivity to the Jewish population. I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of knowledge of the Jewish population. I certainly have gained a lot of knowledge and respect, and so I was pretty much minding my own business at my museum, which deals with medical history, American medicine. And, of course, we certainly have human remains, bones, instruments for medicine. That can be pretty terrifying and gruesome. And it was one of our college students that was doing an internship that brought it to my attention that his roommate, in some curiosity of the unknown and paranormal, had purchased this Jewish wine container, a box made for holding glasses and wine, but it had been altered to a degree that it was meant as a kind of a religious, maybe even a prayer piece. And it was called the Dybbuk box. And I certainly like all things history, so I was curious about this item. I certainly, with its history that was told, and I might give you a little more on that, was a little bit apprehensive about coming into contact with an item that may or may not have some type of spiritual attachment.
So then when you did come in contact with it, what were the supernatural things that you have experienced since obtaining the box?
Well, and that was kind of the idea. From the beginning, we had heard that initially it was all kind of fun and games. Let's get this supernatural thing, these college students, and we'll kind of tease people, play around with it. But then as injuries, bleeding eyes, electronics going haywire, bug infestations, I mean massive, a lack of ability to sleep and restlessness, and then shadowy figures, then physical health of choking and hair falling out. Suddenly it wasn't such a fun thing anymore. And hearing about this, it's like I was even more apprehensive about, now I don't really, not sure I really want to have anything to do with this item. But a friend of mine who is an illusionist, meaning that you create the appearance of magic. He wanted to do a show and create a demon effect. I said, well, he said, well, how would I actually convince an audience that I actually conjured something? I said, well, I've heard of this thing called a Dybbuk box. If you had this, it would come with this spiritual demonish-like thing, and therefore there would be the excuse for your magic. And he said, you mean this real thing exists? I said, well, yeah, but gee, the college kid that has it is having kind of some problems. He wants to get rid of it. I don't think we should dabble with that. Why don't we just kind of make one that looks like it and call it a Dybbuk box? He goes, well, I'm willing to do that if we can't get the real thing. And so he goes, why don't you negotiate and work towards getting the real thing, which I did, with the confidence that he said, hey, if anything goes wrong, I'll take this item. You don't have to worry. Well, when things started getting strange, I started, coughing up strange materials, choking all the time, breaking out in hives. My eyes were bloody, as if somebody had been damaging them. All kinds of electric and little flashes of lights. And I too was seeing shadowy things and unusual amounts of cold where there was, ample heat coming out of the furnaces and stuff. So these things led me to tell my friend, hey, I think it's time you took this Dybbuk box away, and he wouldn't have anything to do with it. So I was now left with two things. I could do what everybody else did, is pass it on, or I could try to figure out what is this thing all about. And I chose to do the latter because I already felt that I'd heard about enough owners being harmed by it that it would be unethical to pass it on. And I was told, well, why don't you just destroy it? My fear is if there was some type of attachment to this thing, destroying access, burning it, might actually cause this thing to permanently reside with me or my family, and I certainly didn't want that.
Did you go to the doctor? Did you talk to the people from the electric company? Did you look for natural explanations for all these phenomena? Or was it like, it must be the box?
Yeah, I'm not really a person that is really into the paranormal and spiritual aspects. So my first instinct was there's got to be a natural explanation, a scientific reasoning for these things to happen. And I'll be honest, initially, my first instinct was when I started, choking, my eyes were bloody, I was disoriented and not being able to sleep. I thought, and having horrible nightmares, which I'm not typically a person to dream like that. My assumption was this object is contaminated, whether it's been purposely or accidentally poisoned, that someone has done something to this, and that's what's causing everybody to get sick. And the most logical explanation would be either a heavy metal like arsenic or cyanide, and that someone has actually coated this perhaps, and in touching and then putting my hands to my mouth or eyes, or even just leaching through the skin, you don't even have to do anything, just handling it could leach these chemicals into your body. And I thought, well, that's what's happened, is I've actually physically poisoned myself, because many artifacts actually use, in the museum world, cyanide and arsenic as a preservative. It keeps bugs off of, particularly in our museum, human remains and nerves, bones. By coating something with arsenic, you could basically, keep something from being damaged. And it can have a preserving effect in that way. So I thought, well, that's what's happened. Somebody's actually coated this thing by accident or on purpose. So I we have museum tests. It's very easy to do. You take a little bit of water and you spread it over the surface. Then you take a cotton swab or cotton Q-tip of sorts. You can basically then gather residue, and then by testing it with chemicals, you can get a reaction that would tell you if there was anything of a heavy metal nature. I did this and was surprised to find that the only material on the box was sugar water. Sugar is a very hard, it doesn't decompose. It's a very also old way of coating something to protect it. So there was nothing that could be construed as being poisonous with this. So that baffled me more, because I was sure the symptoms of arsenic, which would be all of the things I described, are very common to arsenic poisoning. But not having now the scientific reason for these things, it really did become even more baffling to me. And I did go to see, you asked a good question, did I go and see doctors? And I did. And they would do blood tests, do physicals, and they said, actually, your health is very, very good. But I said, well, something's wrong. I've got tuberculosis. I don't want to act like a hypochondriac, but I'm not well. I'm breaking out in hives, and then they're going away. My eyes have blood in them that's permanent. Something is wrong with me. It's like, no, your health is actually excellent. So this became even more baffling to me, is that through all tests, I seemed to be physically well, but I knew internally, whether it was psychosomatic or whatever was happening was coming and going in a manifestation that didn't register within the health or the physical realm of physical health, was a problem. So I did do these things and basically remained ill. And that's what made me think, well, then I need to figure out through maybe a spiritual realm, talking to Kabbalah students, priests, rabbis, maybe they could help me unravel this mystery of this very definite Jewish artifact.
My next question was going to be, have you turned to God or your faith tradition to help you deal with this phenomena? What was the first approach you took, and then what led you to go to experts in other fields of religious perspective?
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Well, and again, David, I find myself to be very spiritual, but as far as specific denomination, I've had a lot of exposure to, a variety of faiths, whether it be the Amish, the Mennonites, Hindi. I was raised Methodist, so, very traditional Christianity. Didn't have a lot of exposure to the Jewish faith, certainly knew some Jewish people. And even looking around here, whether it be the Mormon faith, basically Islam, all these different things, because of being at universities, very familiar with a huge population of religions. And as I look at them all, I say, well, I think of myself more spiritual, that I think everybody has a spirit. I think there is an afterlife. I do believe that, if you do good and try to better yourselves, that's the right path to stay on. But in this case, because this was specifically a Jewish-related item, and I wanted to make sure, I took it to rabbis and said, what is your thought? And they said, well, looking, and this item did contain actually Hebrew writing, a prayer on the back. Some of the artifacts had it actually even the word shalom, which is a form of peace, maybe in a peace that could only be achieved in death. When the rabbis looked at the actual writing, they said this was written by someone who knows Hebrew. It's very unlikely this would be somebody that would not be Jewish, because it is written correctly. And if you tried to copy it or emulate it, there'd be telltale signs. And actually, I went and took a course in the Hebrew language and found that after doing that, I could very quickly recognize someone who knew the letters, knew the writing of the alphabet, versus somebody who was just trying to make it look like the writing. So in this sense, nobody doubted this item was of Jewish origin. Those that certainly, however, they also said this is not a typical Jewish item. It's Jewish in origin, but it's not what we use. But it doesn't mean somebody didn't misconstrue their way of seeing their religion and create this thing. All religion people, you go to church, you hear things, and then how you internalize your faith may reflect something very personal that might not be really mainstream. You might even have a very unique aspect of your own religion. And that's what their belief was, that whoever created this, we're sure they're Jewish. We're not sure where they got the idea to do this, but it's their interpretation. And ultimately, we were told this was a box to talk. This prayer box was a way of communicating with God, a way of gaining comfort, a way of focusing prayer. And that's what the family ultimately, when we went back to who sold this, and of course, as they said, well, the reason we sold this was it belonged to a family member, Grandma. When she died, the item was to be buried with her. However, the rabbi who was to perform the ceremonies said that no, he didn't believe in burying material objects. That's not part of the Jewish faith, and they wouldn't do it. So therefore, we had this strange piece created by grandmother and nothing to do with it, so we just sold it. We just got rid of it. And though we didn't feel that was the right thing to do, we didn't know what else to do. And so that's actually how it left the Jewish community and became part of a very non-Jewish kind of element and more of a spiritual element. So
when you first hear about the box, it sounds a lot like one of those ghost traps in Ghostbusters. So you believe that the original owners somehow contacted an evil force through a seance and trapped the demon. This is similar to the idea of the genie in the bottle and Middle Eastern myth with the Jinn. Is that the ultimate source of what you think happened, or was it a later situation that it was passed down through the family and then somehow the demon got connected to it, or the spirit?
Well, I appreciate that, David. I think that there was elements of trying to, as in all religious ceremonies, by leaving objects very personal, very physical, whether it be hair, which obviously ties you to a real person. Coins are great because you know they were minted and existed at the date that's on them. So when you have a coin, you know that it's lived since it was minted through all this time. So it's a very direct linear link in time to a place. And actually even a dimension in the continuum of time moving. So the things that were in it, including the language, the Hebrew language, really did look like somebody was trying to control otherworldliness. And whether they were successful or not, again, remember, in our physical world, we've got all the stuff we want. We've got phones, we've got cars, we've got artwork, we've got paintings, books, we've got things. But in a spiritual realm, you don't have, physical things. And so the concept is that if you create a space and you do a ritual to give physical things to a non-physical entity, it wants those things. And so in essence, what traps it is its own perception of, these are mine, I don't want to leave them. So that's what does the trapping. Is there really a physical trap? No. But is there kind of an emotional or mental trap? Yes. And they do this kind of interestingly with, we can look at animals for this. When elephants are young, they rope them with a heavy rope to a tree. And when the little elephant gets to the end of the rope, it tugs with its leg, it can't get away, and it stops. As that little elephant grows up into a massive beast, you can still use just about a piece of kite string, because in its mind, when it feels the end of the rope, it still perceives itself as a baby, and it can't get away. Even though now that it could literally pull up the whole tree if it wanted to, in its mind, it still thinks it's tethered to the tree, and it doesn't try to push the boundaries anymore. And so it's a legitimate question: is the elephant really being tethered, or is it mentally in a state of mind that thinks it's trapped when it really isn't. If it wanted to charge away, it could, but it doesn't know it can. And so these are kind of elements when you play with putting things in a box to trap a spirit. If you give a spirit things, will it stay to live with its things? And we see in human life, people will make decisions or they'll mentally trap themselves when they really aren't. They'll stay in a home with agoraphobia, that the fear of going outside of something keeps them, even though they could literally open the door and go out and nothing would happen, their mental state keeps them trapped, even though there's nothing physically that should be keeping them in the home. So it's kind of this way. When you trap a spirit, do you really trap a spirit, or is there a perception of that? So I don't know if that explains it, but I want to tell you how I see it.
So what's the actual origin? Because I've heard two different versions. One was that they had it in Poland and they used it. And then in another one reported by Max Gross from the Jewish Daily Forward said that the person bought it in Spain. So is there conflicting ideas, or have you been able to match them?
Well, the way it matches in the sense that the original was created to try to trap a spirit and it went wrong. And when it went wrong, basically it was the night of Kristallnacht. Lives were turned upside down. This was a program against the Jews that had never happened like this. I mean, they had things happen, but usually, they break a few windows, they shove you around a little bit, you might get beat up, but then everything goes back to normal again the next day. In this case, is the first time of using concentration camp. I think about 33,000 Jews were put in a concentration. That never happened, that kind of concentration camp concept. I think 800 synagogues were burned to the ground, thousands of businesses destroyed. So this was a new way of things. And in the process, really, it was the beginning of the Holocaust. And so everything was fairly lost, including the original Dybbuk box. Who knows where it went? But when Havilah escaped, she bought this and basically tried to undo whatever it is they thought they'd done the night of Kristallnacht, which would have been November 9th, 1938. So do you see why there was one, but it was lost? She recreated something to try to undo, and in essence recreated a spirit box, a prayer box, that could have that same power.
Tell us about the ark that you created to protect you from the box, and then what are the actual contents? I know you mentioned the pennies. What else is inside?
So there's 2 locks of hair. There's a reddish blonde lock. There's a dark black kind of piece, grouping of hair. There's a rose, something from nature. There are the 4 pieces of granite that combine. They're rare granites. They're not from the United States. That if you're aware of granite, it actually has quartz in it, and therefore when you have granite, there's actually an energy source. I mean, you can run a watch off quartz. So you could hit a piece of granite and more energy may actually leave than actually went in with the force. It's just because it can hold energy. So if you think of a battery, the battery could be the quartz, which has also then the Hebrew writing of shalom, which means peace. But you also then have to conceive that then the Hebrew language, the vibration, the use of the language has an element of quantum physics, because when we look at, and I not want to get too heavy here, but when we look at that vibration, that language creates, vision creates, sound is all part of it. The fact that physical things are actually seem solid because of the vibration. They're actually, the actual amount of material is pretty small, but when that material vibrates, it seems to be solid and holds together, which is why when we pull it apart at the smallest level, we get these atom bombs, because things do not want to be pulled apart. So we can think of this quantum physics world that the Hebrews were, the Jewish population used in their Hebrew language, was very aware of. So there's this quartz, which has this, again, energy in the language. The Shema, which is a prayer on the back of protection on the box. There's a candlestick. Obviously, it's got tentacles, which would be of the ocean. The ocean has always been a mystic. We know more probably about the universe and above the land than we actually know under the ocean. So there is a mystery to the sea and a mysticism of the sea. So this candlestick has these tentacles of a creature of the sea. And then the candle itself, when lit, with flame, you create a dimension, fire, and the actual energy of fire. It's kind of amazing that the whole world doesn't just explode with fire. So there is this element of another dimension through flame. There's a brass cup, a Kiddush cup, and alcohol is introduced. And whether you have alcohol in yourself or even near something religious, it has an effect on the atmosphere and the elements and the energy that's around. That alcohol carries an energy. So I think that pretty much contains everything that's part of the Dybbuk box. The actual creating of an ark was a recommendation by both Kabbalah students and rabbis, is that just as the Ark of the Covenant, which held the stones of basically the Ten Commandments, the laws of God, when they broke, they were carried about in an ark. The ark was made of a wood of the Middle East, which is acacia. Acacia grows very slow. It's very drought resistant because of the desert. It's almost impenetrable. It's actually tougher than metal. So it's fireproof, it's waterproof, it's bug-proof because of the conditions it grows under. So when you wanted to create temples in the ancient times, you would use the wood of acacia. It's almost indestructible. So the Ark of the Covenant was to be this acacia wood lined in gold. Gold is a blessing to God. It's a rare element. And so the rabbis recommended that this religious item would best be contained in this kind of wood, but gathered from one tree because of unity. Line it with gold, put this thing in it, and then bury it, and the ground will draw the energy out of this thing eventually, and it will be at peace. And that's what the Jewish population does with amulets and little written mysticism pieces through Kabbalah. When you're done, you're to put them in a box in the synagogue, and when the box gets full, they take it out in the desert, they bury it, and it's done. Now, if somebody finds it decades later, supposedly the energy's gone, and you can do whatever you want with these little amulets and such.
In another interview I listened to, the original owner of the box, Kevin Mattis, spoke about many entities being trapped inside the box. Is there any evidence of this? And has anyone found out the name of the entity, like the passage in the New Testament when Jesus confronts a demon and his name is Legion or many, in relation to many spirits?
Right. The thing that Kevin talks about is because of the word kishaf, which has been interpreted as a jokester kind of spirit, but remember, this was pronounced by someone who heard Grandma talking, and she said, well, Grandma said that there's kishaf in it. And it's like, okay, well, what's that? I don't know. And there's a Dybbuk. Well, what's a Dybbuk? Well, we don't really know. The Dybbuk itself is a spirit that has unfinished business, so it is a human that tries to go on to the other world, afterlife, but for whatever reasons, its deeds were such that it's not able to find peace. So the spirit remains, and through other people tries to undo whatever bad it might have done. So that's kind of the element of what might be a Dybbuk. A kiss-off, I think what she really might have meant is that it's a Dybbuk with kissamim, and that actually is tokens. And we find tokens inside the Dybbuk box. The hair, the pennies, the stones, all that would be, in ancient Hebrew, kissamim. And they would be used for magic, mysticism. And so I feel that I am more accurate in saying that because that's what the evidence seems to be, versus just saying maybe it means this and it's a jokester spirit. It's like, well, I don't see any physical evidence that supports that, and especially since everything was pronounced you have to trust that what you heard was accurate. Even the word Dybbuk the first time was written with an I. Mostly you see Dybbuk with a Y. But if you're phonetically writing out what you hear, D-I-B-B-U-K, Dybbuk. Well, in Hebrew, when I went to a rabbi, I said, well, is it Dybbuk with an I or is it Dybbuk with a Y? He goes, it doesn't matter. I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, there is no translation of the Hebrew language, so whatever you write, it doesn't matter. You know, you can write Dybbuk with an I, you can write it with a Y, you can write it with double E's. I don't, because it is not what it is. It's a representation. And so a representation isn't accurate anyway. The word is as it is in the Hebrew language. This is why when we see the word Kabbalah, you can see it with a K. You can see it with a C. You can see it with a QU. There is no translation of Kabbalah. So it doesn't matter how you write it. And you can write it with a K and a Q and a C all in the same paragraph because it doesn't matter. It's not correct no matter how you write it. It is an approximation. So how is one approximation better than another approximation? So all I'm saying is when Kevin says there's maybe two spirits, I would beg to differ. And I've told him I beg to differ on that. I've gone back and done my research, and Kissimum is tokens in something, and there's tokens in this thing.
Many rational Jewish scholars feel that superstition is a remnant of a more ancient animistic ideas and that it does not belong in traditional Judaism. However, there's a strong tradition from the Kabbalah and the Hasidic community of Eastern Europe in relation to possession. Have you debated any skeptics who feel that the events that surround the box are all psychological and based on suggestion up to this point?
Well, you bring up a good point about, Judaism today versus Judaism of several hundred years ago. However, I was just most recently in Las Vegas talking to Rabbi Wein, and though he's a very contemporary, very modern, very young rabbi, he says that, we believe these things can exist. We don't doubt him. We're not saying that this is, but we're saying we do believe it. Therefore, it's possible. So even in the most modern context, there is that space to say there is the unknown, and we believe that this is very possible. Whether we believe this is the case here, I've never heard any rabbi willing to put themselves on the line and say yes or no, especially when they understand the full story of the Dybbuk box. Most of them step back and go, this is of interest, because the Jewish faith believes there are no accidents. So everything has a purpose. And I remember talking to one of the rabbis and saying, hey, why would a Methodist guy end up with a Jewish artifact? Why don't you guys have it? Why aren't you guys, given this mystery? And the rabbi said, well, again, I don't believe there's an accident in you having it because you're not being Jewish. You will question everything about it. However, we are so comfortable with our faith, we are likely to overlook and miss things that you won't because you're not Jewish. But in working with us, we will be able to interpret those things. So it really will be a relationship of you with those of the Jewish faith. But we believe we would overlook things in the process of studying this. And so that was the explanation. He also said that we're all together. It's not the Jews and the non-Jews. That picture us all in a boat, and we're all in this world together. And we have our little space in the boat. And as you sit in your little space in this boat, which might be the whole world, you can do whatever you want in your little seat in your space. However, if you choose to take out a drill and create a hole in your seat that basically sinks the boat, you have now affected everybody around you, and you do not have that permission. So within the means of us all being tied together, you have a responsibility in your space, but it is your space. And so this is their way of explaining how we're all working together. We all affect each other. And, this is the way the world is, that it's not us and them. It really is everybody coming together and trying to make things right. So I don't know if that helps you explain why a Methodist guy would end up with a Jewish artifact, and the rabbis and Kabbalah and people are perfectly comfortable with that.
Have you had a chance to counter some of the skeptics when it comes down to just spirituality in general? Because people from the outside would say, well, that's interesting for Jews and Christians or spiritual people, but when you're someone who does not believe in the supernatural, all this sounds kind of weird. So working in the scientific world, have you had a chance or any interest in addressing this from a different standpoint? And has anybody tried to stump you or try to dismiss your experiences?
Well, and I guess what I'm saying is I'm open to that. I myself was trying to believe everything but spirituality on this because, again, that's why my first instinct and in my book was I've been poisoned. I work at a museum. It's very likely. It's easy to look at the scientific elements first but when you've basically processed everything that you can scientifically, then what are you left with? If it doesn't appear this, then there's almost too much to say that there's nothing here. I mean, that's what I'm saying. But there's not enough evidence to basically point that conclusively here it is. But you can also equally say, but there's too many things, too many coincidences, because I'm okay with a coincidence or two. But when they start building up in layers, it's like this, how many times can something that's 1 in a million happen with this item over and over and over again? You're starting to end up with way too many issues going on, including what the prayer to the box was about. And if you've read the book, I think that's the thing is people who go off on tangents and saying, well, this can't be, or you say this, or you say that. They've really not like you, which I'm very impressed with the amount of research that you've done on this item. You obviously are very serious about spirituality and trying to understand, what's going on here. And I think you found an item that, challenges you a little bit. And I appreciate how many interviews you've listened to. You mentioned one of the first interviews with Max Gross. I almost forgot about that, but he really was the first person to contact me as a reporter for the Jewish magazine. And so you've gone through quite a bit of material. And so when somebody wants to say, well, a skeptic, I'm okay with it. My job and my book says, look, this thing is really one of the most amazing spiritual things you're going to come across, or it may just be nothing. And that's all it is. It's just plain and simply nothing. So I begin the first chapter of the book saying, really, it's going to be up to you to read through this book and then see if you solidify your stance, whatever that might be. Or you may still stand in the middle and say, I'm still not sure. It could fall one way or the other. And I think I was open to spirituality, but I guess I wasn't such a spiritual person. I was probably more leaning to, and through the whole book, trying to debunk the book and the concept. And every time I'd come across something, be like, here it is. Finally nailed this. It is just somebody's wish, this to have power. But it's nothing but physical items. And in the end, it still is physical items, but can something be endued with some kind of power? And so I've come to see people have come to this box and made wishes upon it. And weirdly enough, they're not the kind of wishes that really normally would come true. I mean, and yet they've been rewarded with getting what they want. However, I discovered that if you try to make a wish for yourself, it doesn't work so well. I mean, it still may come out. But as always, when you give to someone else, you also end up with, I think, a better possibility of things being really working out the best possible way that it can. And so I do see it as a form of a wish box. I think as it was, it's a way to spiritually focus and talk to a higher entity and get a response. Because what is a prayer but wishing for something? Please, we're in great need right now. I would love to not have to worry financially, or please, I have a child that's sick. If they could just get better, if we could get through this, or please, many prayers in many ways are asking for things or like making wishes for some people who may be less spiritual but would still be doing the same thing. And so I do find it fascinating that this box appears to somehow connect to some energy, whether, again, it's through just science of vibration, but something happens, I think, when you interact with the materials. And the scientist told me, well, look, Jason, look, you got copper, you got granite, you got this iron of this candlestick, you got this brass cup, you got fire. You've got really an electromagnet mix that's causing your illness, that's causing strange things like exploding light bulbs, shadowy figures. This is all can be explained scientifically as electromagnetic energy. And I said, okay, so what do you do with it? Well, you contain that, and the best way to ground it is to line this container with gold. And then you go to the Kabbalah and the rabbis and say, no, this is spiritual. And spiritual, you need to contain it in holy wood and use gold because it is a blessing to God, and then bury it and it'll draw the energy out. Well, you know what? The scientists are saying the exact same thing, only they're calling it electromagnet and they're calling it science. The religious are saying, no, this is spiritual, and yet how you deal with it is in the same way the scientists would deal with it, with gold and burying and containment. So my thought was, you know what? If I do this, if I put it in an ark of gold, I've done what both have said. So I don't care as long as the results end up good, that things get back to normal. But I think it's fascinating that two different groups for two different reasons use the exact same method to contain what they called the Dybbuk box. And one was scientists and one was religious. So I think it's fascinating.
Has anybody actually been possessed by this spirit, and has anybody talked to it and asked it what it wants? And then if someone has partaken of that, have they gone through the whole exorcist process in Judaism? I know it's complicated. There's a lot of psalms that are written.
Opinion of 10 Jewish people and all this that could be done. We haven't gone to that extreme with it because things did kind of quiet. If you believe that indeed the Dybbuk is a spirit, if we just take it at base level, we were told it's a Dybbuk box. We were told there's a Dybbuk. There's stuff in it. Okay, maybe that's Kessamim or whatever. It doesn't matter. But the key thing is it's a Dybbuk. Well, if we go then to what Jewish people say, a Dybbuk is a human that lived on this earth, walked on this earth, did something horrible, died before they could make restitution, and therefore has come back to try in some way to make amends. So if we go at that level of a Dybbuk, then who could this Dybbuk be? And I'm not sure, David, if you've read enough to get to that point. And that is something that I've consistently, why I have the most comfort is, if it is a Dybbuk, the woman's prayer was to understand the Holocaust. How did it begin? And I guess, David, if I was asking you plain and simple, if you had to nail it to, ground zero, where did it basically spring up from? If you had to name a person that could be the Dybbuk, this woman prays and creates this thing and talks to God and wants to know how it began. Why did it start? Why did 6 million people that were Jewish die? But there were gypsies and gays and blacks and all kinds of other people that were killed, millions more. And so if you look to, Hitler did create laws that caused all this. But if you go back before then, Hitler actually was thrown in prison during his first rebellion. It was a failure. He got 200 of these kind of extreme, kind of paranormal kind of people, and he marched on the government, and 8 of them were killed, and he got thrown into jail for 8 years. And while he was in jail, he looked around and said, well, 200 crazy friends doesn't make a very good coup to take over the government. What is working? And he looks to the United States, and in the United States, he sees that we have laws on sterilization, immigration restriction, marriage restriction. These were all laws created in the 1920s by a man by the name of Harry Hamilton Laughlin. So if this woman's praying to the box to find out where did it all begin, and she's living in Portland, Oregon, and she lives to be 103, and she dies, and she says, when I'm dead, bury this thing with me because my prayer is done. But the family can't because the rabbi won't bury it with her. So now they throw her prayer box out into the world, and what they say is it set the thing off. The box was going to answer her prayer. So it ends up in Kirksville, Missouri. Now, we have no synagogue. We have no Jewish population. We didn't during World War II, and we don't today. There might be a student or two. There might be a teacher or two. But there is nothing really Jewish about Kirksville. Never has been, isn't now. But there is a man who is basically agriculture. He's breeding animals, and he's preaching that you must kill off 10% because of the genetic code. There's always genetic strains or mutants that basically you need to kill off 10%. And even though you've got 10 chickens and you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to get money for all 10, that one that's not right will breed. And basically your whole flock will eventually become mediocre and it'll be worthless. So you must kill the 10% in order to have a good stock. He writes to Charles Davenport, who is doing eugenics in Cold Spring Harbor, New York, and he says, my gosh, this brilliant young agricultural man, come be my assistant. And there he does research on humans. He takes chicken information and transfers it to humans and populations, and he starts doing research, sending it to Congress, and by 1924, we have the first sterilization law. By 2029, we have 31 states that say that we should be sterilizing people for epilepsy, genetic issues, blindness, deafness, if they're orphans, if they have any addictions. We have all these, if they're not as bright as we think they should be. We're not going to kill them. We're going to sterilize them. And we're going to restrict who comes to America. And we've had basically hundreds of thousands of Jews coming. Suddenly we cut off that avenue. We will only take 25,000 immigrants and basically no Jews. The Jews had nowhere to escape when Hitler started doing his evil. But let's go further. Marriage. We're going to prevent people from marrying each other. Hitler in jail looks to the United States in the 20s and says, that's what we need to do. We need to become a national government like the United States is becoming. And he adopts these laws verbatim. However, in the first year of sterilization laws in the Nuremberg laws, they basically take care of 350,000. And here in America, Harry Laughlin is screaming in his eugenics magazines and stuff, Hitler is beating us at our game. We created these laws, and he's doing it right. He's going over there. He gets an honorary degree from Hitler, from Heidelberg, a medical degree. He basically is at their conferences, and Hitler is using the American laws of this man to do great evil. Now, by the time we figure this out in the United States, what's been happening for the last, 15 years or so, it's too late. And so what we basically say is, how do we stop Harry? They take away his money for the eugenics program, and he comes back home to Kirksville, builds his mansion, but before he enjoys it, he becomes, at the age of 60, a latent epileptic. He is now the same diseased trash that needs to be sterilized based on laws he created. Now, we don't know what's wrong with Harry. He suffers for 3 years and dies of a massive heart attack, January 1943. War goes on, millions and millions die, and finally the war ends. We go to Europe, and we're going to try these Nazis, these Germans, for what they've done. And they do it in groups. They don't basically try you one at a time. There's too many. So we're basically bringing in whole groups of people. We bring in the judges and the lawyers, and we sit them in front of us and say, okay, these laws were harmful, killing, horrible things. What is your defense? And the defense of the whole group was, a greater nation did this first. It's on record. Go to the Nuremberg laws. Look at what happened at the trial of the judges and lawyers. A greater nation did these laws first. And with that, we could either throw them away for life and come back and do the same thing in the United States, or we could meter out a not as great punishment, and they shut up, and we change the history so that we're not involved with that, and it's forgotten. But go online right now, type in Laughlin, Laughlin, and Hitler. That's all you have to do. And what I've just told you will tell you that if you wanted to know the beginning of these laws that did so much harm that Hitler used, it was a man who couldn't tell the difference between a chicken and a human. And then basically wrote laws that grew from those to Hitler's laws. Now, I don't know if you believe it or not. What is the chance of this crazy little box that was created answering this family prayer landing in the one spot you would never expect? Kirksville? But that's where this man began, and that's where he came back and died. So if there is a Dybbuk and you have unfinished business, could it be Harry, who is shining a light? Because he got away with it. He died. He's in an unmarked grave in this town. And after 1943, he was forgotten. But now he's not being forgotten. And we're starting to take on the responsibility of what did we do to our fellow humankind that was horrible. You know, those laws on sterilization stayed through the 60s. If a young girl was raped and pregnant, she was considered promiscuous and sterilized. If a boy lost his parents, he was considered a risk growing up and sterilized. The only of the 31 states that had these laws, Virginia apologized 3 or 4 years ago, and North Carolina actually apologized, and all survivors got $50,000. Now, this does not take away never having a family, but they said at least we've done something. And go and look that up, because that's true too. So I don't know if this helps, David, but what is the chance of this strange part of our history, this really sadness that most people have never even heard? But tonight, I'm not telling you a lie. That's what my research, and that's what I think there's a contentment when the Jewish population, and they don't even know about this, many of them heard it for the first time through the Dybbuk box. And that's why they're somewhat in awe of, we don't understand how things work, but there are no accidents. And perhaps this creation to tell this story was something that we needed. But I would have never guessed it. So I don't know. What do you think, David?
That's a wonderful response. In this show, we pride ourselves to going deeper than others because we know that ideas have consequences. Having a supernatural view of the world affects everything you do. You sharing that history is very powerful because I know of this from learning about medical bioethics and things like that. So it's all there, but sometimes it takes something as exciting as the Dybbuk box or the movie like The Possession to get people to dig deeper and learn from it. So I know before the show started, we talked about how, in a sense, you're famous and your story has brought about this movie, but challenge you that maybe you can suggest going deep in the sequel and actually addressing some of these issues, because as much as someone wants to be scared or entertained in a film, sometimes film is the greatest way to address issues that happened in the past and that could happen in the future. I think Americans have become very complacent and they don't think about these things. They don't think about how some of the policies, they might not be as gruesome as they were back in the 30s, but there's still some of the ramifications of them that are happening. And I think the religious people are the easiest people to get dismissed and say, oh, well, they have paranoia, they think everybody's trying to get them. But sometimes religious, spiritual people are the ones who can be the conscience to the greater society and bring up important stuff that most people want to move on and forget about. So I really applaud you for taking the opportunity to bring this up. And it shows that you care about more things than just getting your story out. So I appreciate that.
Well, David, and finishing up, you bring up a point that I bang my head trying to convince these paranormal investigators and stuff that this truly is an amazing story. And yet they were like, no, we want to scream and run because there's a mystic specter hanging around the box. I mean, that's all we want. We just want the screams and the drama. And it's like, well, is there not enough drama in this story that, I mean, and so I have to say I'm very frustrated that I keep telling the story, but very often it's like they negate that out of it. I have to say the History Channel did a very good job of nailing it. But I just did a show with the Travel Channel called Deadly Possessions, and the film crew's with me saying, why will you guys not? I said, let me tell you the story. They said, okay, tell us the story. When it was done, they were like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. But I'll be perfectly honest with you, that's not what the man in charge of this production really wants. So don't worry, people may be driven to find the deeper story, even if we don't tell it. And it's like, but do you understand how frustrating that is for me? And the guy who was the producer says, I get it, and you've convinced me. I am more scared of this item than, and I've been shooting this show for the last 8 years. This thing probably has more power than anything else, at least in what's happened. And however it's told the story, I don't care. It's a crazy story, and I don't doubt it's true. But the sad thing is, the guy who's running the show doesn't want to tell that story. And that's just the way it is. But people may dig deeper in your story and get to what the real truth is. And so I appreciate that. When you say I'm a celebrity, I laughed. Most of the royalty money from the movie actually goes to orphans at the Betho orphanage in Vietnam. My dad was a pilot. Horrible things happened to those people. They lost millions. We lost thousands. Don't really want to get into that too much, except for the fact I feel that there was an opportunity to try to make amends for what my family has done. And so that's why the money goes to that area from the movies. The book itself, almost all the proceeds go basically to the university. It's a public university where I learned Hebrew, and I support the science and the experimentation, but it is the same university that basically hired Harry Laughlin to teach agriculture, Truman University. And so what I'm saying is I'm hoping that the money that goes from the book will, and telling this story, create people from that school that will go out and do better. And I keep telling Ramey, please read the book, because in it, chapter 10, this is the story. This is why I can be at peace and not be afraid. Because why aren't you afraid of it? I put it away because I don't want people preying on it. I don't want to activate it. But I'm not afraid of it. It's done what it was supposed to do. It answered the prayer, and it's done. And the prayer is, you need to be careful. Animals and humans are two very different things. Animals are born knowing, and they have no fear of their death. They know their place. We humans are still learning and on a journey of growth, of spirituality. And that's why we cannot treat an animal and a human so insignificantly like each other. Animals are here for us to care for, but we can also benefit from them. It's not the other way around. And so in that sense, we are on a spiritual journey that animals are not on. And therefore, I just hope people look at that. And I appreciate the time that you've given me, because if I keep hammering away and I've got nothing to hide, maybe we will treat humans better and with more compassion, so that when we are all together in the great beyond, we reconnect. Because if we are spiritual beings, whatever happens in this earth, as horrible as it is, once we're free of the physical bonds, we will all be equal. There will be no more beauty. There will be no physical pain. There will be no want. There will be no need for things. And so when we do come together, it'll be interesting to see what we share as that experience from this human life. And so I'm glad that people want to know this story, and hopefully maybe take a kinder look at the world and what they're doing to try to be a little better person. And that's why I never fear talking about this. I think it's been an amazing experience, a very spiritual growing experience, but I'm not here to convince you anything. And I just, again, thanks again, David, for your time tonight.
Well, thank you. And we like to build relationships with our guests and hopefully have you on a future show. Do you have any other interests? When I first saw your book, there was other books under it, and I thought they were written by you, but it was just things that are similar. Have you studied or researched any other paranormal stuff and the relation with science? As our last question.
Again, it's not really an area. Weirdly enough, I've studied this object as it relates to the Jewish mysticism, and almost all mysticism and magic has come through the Jewish population. And so that's why it's been a great study. I have literally nine linear feet of files because I took it very seriously. Another group that I've studied and have befriended have been the Amish group. So sometime if you want to chit-chat about that population, because like the Jewish population, it is kind of closed. If you're not born into it, it's really hard to have an avenue to really be and understand it all. And it's also true of the Amish population. They don't evangelize. They don't typically bring people in. If you're not born into it, you really won't have that exposure, that experience. So maybe sometime we can give a chat about the Amish.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Thank you for listening. We will be back next week with another episode of The Mystic and the Skeptic.